Hello, my name is Travis Lee, and today we're talking about the QuickBooks Online integration. I think there's some hesitancy off the bat in connecting really any software with your accounting software, but I promise it's not that bad. We're going to walk through it today, and also we're not going to send a slew of information over to QuickBooks immediately when you turn it on. It's really a moving forward type of setup to where invoices and bills created in the future will send over. You'll have the old information eligible to send, but it's not something that's assumed. So if you've been using JobTread for a while, just know that's not automatically going to push all that information over into QuickBooks. It's a little bit more tactful than that. So how's it work? If you look at our front end website, we have a really nice graphic, jobtread.com/QuickBooks-online. This shows the specific information getting sent back and forth. You can see the direction here in the middle, but the basic gist is invoices and bills created within JobTread will create a copy in QuickBooks, and when it's paid in either system, the other system will reflect that. And we also are going to pull in QuickBooks expenses if you want them to, as well as time can port from JobTread over to QuickBooks. So it's really the invoices, it's the bills, it's the time syncing between the systems. What's required of QuickBooks as far as the plan goes? Essentials will work on the customer invoicing side, but you really need the Plus plan to make sure the full integration works. So how does it work? I'm going to start by just walking through just the flow of information, kind of the absolute basics, and then we'll get into how you set up the integration. But in the very bottom left of any jobs that's created, you'll see this push to QuickBooks button. This is kind of your indicator, has this been sent to QuickBooks or not? You could click this button and send it ahead of time if you wanted to, but it's not required because when you create the invoice or bill, at that moment in time, that's when it will send the information across. This is all by design because we don't want to send a bunch of unnecessary information over to QuickBooks. I mean, in JobTread, just because you create a job doesn't mean that you've won the job. So we don't need to send a bunch of potential projects into QuickBooks. It's really only when the money is actually changing hands. So the basic workflow is this. You go into the budget, you create the estimate, you eventually would send a proposal or contract along to the client. They're going to sign and say, yes, take my money. And then eventually you'll send the deposit invoice or in just a regular invoice. Whatever name you choose is up to you, but they're all invoices on the back end. So let's do a 25% invoice, create that here. Of course, you can customize this document. That's a separate video. But when you send it, or if you mark it as pending, it's going to create a copy over in QuickBooks. And the send option is, of course, sending them an email from JobTread. Pending is telling the system this has been sent to the customer, but maybe it's being processed some other way. When you do that, and I refresh my page, notice this really handy View in QBO button that will take me directly to this invoice over in QuickBooks. Also on the job dashboard, this turned to a View in QuickBooks button because now the information's over there. That's the easiest way to check, has this been sent or not? So if we look at QuickBooks now, this is my JobTread contracting group. In the very top right, I'm going to click on the gear icon, click on the search icon, and we'll see this invoice has been created. We can see all the line items have been sent across. The product or service is incorrect. We're going to walk through that in just a moment. But that's the invoice being sent over. It's pretty much immediate in the case of creating invoices and bills. The customer hierarchy here is a very important thing I want to discuss. You'll see here A. Benavidez has a sub-account, which is the location, and there's a sub-account for the job. What we're doing here is we are mimicking the hierarchy within JobTread because you can have many jobs tied to a location and many locations under one customer account. You can see with Alex Weaver right here, we have many jobs that took place at 607 Parker Street. Again, this just mimics what you would find back in JobTread. If you're looking at the job in the top left, you'll see Ricky Williams, then there's a location, and then there's a job. It's the same thing over in QuickBooks. So when we send the invoice over to QuickBooks, we are searching by name. And if the name is a perfect match, that's great. It will tie it to it. Otherwise, it will create a new one on the fly. Same goes for the bills on the vendor side. That workflow is very similar to what we just walked through with the customer, but obviously you're creating vendor bills instead. That will also do a name match with your vendor list, and it will create a new one on the fly as well. So that's going back to the initial kind of import of customers and vendors. We would recommend doing that from your QuickBooks just to make sure the naming conventions are aligned. Back on JobTread. What I want to show you now, though, is one of the more important things about the QuickBooks integration, which is how we utilize cost codes and how those hook up to QuickBooks. In the catalog, you have what we call cost items. You might have thousands of cost items, but we would expect you to have a smaller set of cost codes think of these as your accounting buckets. Some people we work with, their cost items are their cost codes, so they're building estimates with cost codes. So we would expect the code and the item name to be the same, but we allow you to get more detailed. So you could have 50 separate pieces of lumber as individual cost items, but we probably would expect all of those to be tied to a cost code called framing material. The idea is that the codes are a more static set of things that aren't going to evolve over time. I mean, technically you can add more cost codes in time, but it's meant to be a more static set, and that's what syncs with QuickBooks products and services to make sure everything is sent across to QuickBooks going to the right location. So let's get into that now. If we go into settings and we go into our integrations, when you first turn this on, it's going to ask you to connect. That's a basic sign-in, very simple. But when you do, you'll see something like this. And these settings right here are the ones you'll want to look at off the bat. Some of these are very, very simple. So sync files. Do you want the files uploaded to Invoices bills to be sent to QuickBooks and vice versa? I think it's a no-brainer. Why not? Sync credits. So if you're creating a vendor credits or customer credits, should those sync back and forth? I think that's a no-brainer as well. Do you want to pull expenses from QuickBooks? So QuickBooks expenses, if you tie it to a job, it will filter into JobTread. I'll show you how that works a little bit later on. Using projects. So this is more a question for you. Are you currently using projects within QuickBooks? If the answer is yes, you would probably want to turn this on. And now this is going to create an extra step for you. So this is a very important thing to note. I would definitely not recommend turning this setting on or off. You really need to choose a path here. If you turn this on, that's saying we want to use projects over in QuickBooks. That's a setting on the QuickBooks side of things. And if you do, it's going to require you to sync every single job with an existing project on QuickBooks. So the flow would be you create the project over on QuickBooks, and then you edit the job on JobTread, and you'll see a drop down that says QBO project. You would select the one from the list. If you're not doing many jobs throughout the year, it takes 30 seconds to do, so it's not a big inconvenience. But if you're doing more jobs than that, it could be a little bit annoying. So we generally recommend not turning this on, and this will allow us to kind of create the customers on the fly in the flow that I explained earlier, just making life a little bit easier for you. The bottom setting here is use classes. This is another one that's up to you. If you're utilizing classes maybe to identify different divisions within QuickBooks, maybe different types of work, you could turn this on to start tracking it over in JobTread as well. So the biggest part of this setup here is the product and services mapping. This is what I was alluding to before, where all the cost codes are going to sync over to QuickBooks product and services. It's going to do it based off this mapping right here. So in the example I showed, everything got sent to concrete, and this is exactly why right here, because it's set as our default. That doesn't really make sense. We would want this default to be something generic, like uncategorized. So when it comes over to QuickBooks, we see this is uncategorized. Okay, there's probably an issue with the mapping. When would that be used? If you ever add cost codes in time and you forget to connect it to a QuickBooks product or service, it would fall back to this. So we generally recommend leaving it as something like uncategorized. So it's your cue, hey, I need to go make an update here. But the code is on the left-hand side in JobTread. Right-hand side, I can see the QuickBooks product and service. This is the generic sandbox list they provide. You would definitely want to update your product and service list in QuickBooks if it doesn't align with what you have over in JobTread. The alternative is maybe it's already built out in QuickBooks, then we would just run a cost code import to get that list in JobTread. Either way, we want these to align, so when information is sent from one system to the other, it's going to the right place, because the product or service will determine both the income and the expense account connected to it. If you want to take these codes and move them into QuickBooks, we have a pretty simple process for that. Go to Reports, Product and Service List at the bottom here, download that file, and just skip over into QuickBooks. You're going to click the gear icon, Import Data. We're importing products and services. Then from here, you're just going to select that file that you downloaded, hit Next once more, because we already set up the headers to be an exact match. And then this is all of the individual cost codes, and then you can identify the income and expense account here. The sales doesn't exist, income account within this sandbox, but just update that here to match the income account that you want to set for all of these, and click Import at the bottom, and then you're really done at that point. So once those products or services exist within the system, you'll be able to find them here, and you can still update them after the fact, so I can edit them one by one. I can update that income account, I can update that expense account, and again, that's telling the system where the money is going to flow. But all that's over in QuickBooks, right? So back on the JobTread side, settings, integrations, QuickBooks, product and service mapping. Your job here is just to connect this. So this cost code is equal to this product or service. If you did the import I just discussed, you have this autofill button, which will fill everything in for you based off a perfect name match. And then you'll just save at the bottom, and then you're off to the races at that point. There are a few other settings we want to check though. Payment accounts, so if you mark things as paid over in JobTread, what should the deposit to and withdraw from account be? Also, if you're accepting payments from Evo or Stripe, then what should the payment processing deposit account be? And then if you want the processing fee for that system to be handled separately, this is where you can set that. Employee mapping, if you're utilizing JobTread time tracking, you can have the hours get sent along to QuickBooks also. Very simple. What's the person's name? What's that person registered as within QuickBooks? Hopefully it's an exact match. And what hours do we want to start sending from? So if we want to start on January 1 or today maybe, just set that date, and all of the approved time we'll send over to QuickBooks. This is going to go into the weekly timesheets, which can be pulled into your payroll, of course. One note is when you're doing time tracking in JobTread, you are entering the burdened hourly rate. That is what you pay them plus the burden on top. That's meant for job costing exclusively. We're not sending that to QuickBooks. We're setting the hours. So whatever pay rate you have over in QuickBooks, it's going to use that, not the burdened rate over here in JobTread. Last thing over here is unsynced records. This is all the things in JobTread that have been created that are eligible to send to QuickBooks but haven't. So if we turn on this QuickBooks integration today, but we've been using this system for a year, then all of those old invoices and bills would show up here, and I could push them one by one to QuickBooks if I wanted to, or I could push all. Just be wary of this button though, because that would send everything in the past. So all of your documents, so the invoices and bills, all of your customers and vendors, time entries and applied payments that haven't been sent can be seen here. I use this most of the time for troubleshooting. So if a document doesn't get sent for whatever reason, this is the first place I check. Click this button and an error message will appear if there's an error for whatever reason. But once you go through those settings, I mean, you're off to the races. So you can see here QuickBooks Online is set up. Again, we're not sending a slew of information back and forth right off the bat. It's when you start doing invoices, bills, and time moving forward. Last thing I want to mention, over in QuickBooks, you can pull expenses from QuickBooks into JobTread as well. So I'm just going to go create a new expense on the fly for the sake of the example. You would identify who you paid, what you paid for, so select that product or service, and then the customer or project. So the really important thing here is we need to tie this to the job, not the customer account, not the location. If we tie it to the job, that will create an expense document over in JobTread and connect it to the right project. So let's just look at an example here. This is what that will look like. You can see in the activity feed, this was created by QuickBooks, and on the jobs budget, it will allocate it to any item with an exact match of that product or service. Otherwise, it will tie it to the first item that's utilizing the code tied to that product or service. If it can't find a good match, it's going to throw it under uncategorized at the bottom, because we do want to capture the expense. Even if we can't allocate it to the right line item, we want to make sure it's collected on the job as a whole. So if you ever need to reallocate something, there's a really handy tool here for reports, cost mapping. You can see on the right hand side, this allows you to reallocate that money to the right line item to perfect your job costing. So that's the QuickBooks Online integration. Hopefully did this under 15 minutes, but it's a pretty easy setup. It's an integration that works really well. And if you have any questions at all, please reach out to us, support@jobtread.com. Thank you so much. Have a great day.